Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you here with us today. Building your brand is certainly something that's so extremely important. And today we have with us Sheila Murphy, who is one of our career coaching consultants, who is going to give us some great suggestions and ideas of things that we could be doing to really make sure that our brand is the best that it can be, for lots of different reasons that I'm sure she'll have an opportunity to go into. Sheila, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, PJ. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here because, building your personal brand is really sort of the foundation for moving your career forward. So that's what we're going to spend some time today talking about. And if you guys have any questions while we're going through the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. And there we go. There. So I want to spend a few minutes just letting you know a little bit about me. And sort of about me here is about my professional background, but what it doesn't tell you is that when I graduated law school, my dream was to be an ostrich attorney, which is someone who kept my head in the sand and I didn't speak out in public, and I would just be in a dank office churning deal documents. And this dream was destroyed on the first day that I went to work for the law firm when the managing partner came to me and said, we're going to move you from corporate to litigation because we need more people. My heart sank because the idea of putting myself out there was so against everything that I believed in that I decided that, I would just somehow shrink as a litigator and then eventually get into corporate somehow. And I thought my dreams had been solved when I moved in-house. I thought in-house would be different than being a litigator at a law firm. And I found out on a very cloudy day, I remember the day so clearly, that one of my peers got promoted before me. And it wasn't like a peer who was brilliant. It was a peer who really didn't do much in terms of strategy, in terms of knowing what to tell the clients, but he was very good at self-promotion. And that was sort of the aha moment for me when I realized that I wanted to control my career, not just for myself, but for the company that I was at. And part of that was going to mean that I was going to have to self-promote more than I was. And so I started taking steps to change how I was approaching my career. I went from having a career by default to a career that I was curating. And by the time my peer left the company, he actually was reporting to me. And so what I share this with you is because some of the things we may be talking about today may feel uncomfortable. Maybe stuff that you have thought about, but you haven't enacted. And I'm here to tell you that you can do it. You may want to do it step by step, but it's really critical that you take control of your career and your brand. And so this is sort of one of the things that I live by with regard to my career. It's that I have to manage my career as if it's my own business, because you can have the most supportive manager in the world, but no one is going to care about your career and your life as much as you. So I want you to sort of think about, as we're going through this program today, that what can I be doing differently to better position my business? So one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand when we're talking about personal brand is it's really your personal reputation, your professional profile. It's what you're putting out there. And you can be the most brilliant lawyer, the best leader, but if people don't know what you're doing, both internally and externally, they're not going to think about you when it is time for advancement. So you really want to make sure that you're working on your brand, both internally and externally. A lot of times, many of us think of it as just an external exercise, and it's really not. It's both places that you want to focus on. So I want to take a step and think about what is a professional profile. So first of all, it's the deliberate messages that you do send out to the world. It is your LinkedIn profile, your CV, what you write or post about on LinkedIn. Those are the things that you deliberately intentionally think about and you're sending out to the universe. But more critically, it's the impressions you leave. How are you in a business meeting? How do you enter a room when you're late and maybe had a bad meeting before? How do you talk about risk? And then it's not just what people hear directly from you or what they see, but people start to hear things based on those behaviors. So I like to talk about a woman who really put out into the world a fabulous LinkedIn profile. She really did all the work that she should do. And what she was touting was the fact that she was a legal executive who was great at handling huge global projects and matters and deals. But there's a twist. She came to see me and she said, I want to know what people say when I'm not in the room. And I went through all the positive things that she had. And then I said to her, but I got to tell you, your reputation is that you can't execute on these deals. And her heart sank because this is what she was touting internally and externally, this ability. But getting this information on her internal brand allowed her to start thinking about how she should be approaching deals differently. Or perhaps should she be touting a different skill? Because then she asked me, is it just you who thinks this? And I said, no, people are talking about it. And this is why it is really critical that you understand what your brand is today and you think about where you want it in the future.
Sheila, I have a question. How would you find out what are people saying when you're not in the room? How do you go about finding out that information?
There are a couple of different ways. One, it could be something in your feedback that you should be thinking about. And we'll be talking about the importance of the feedback, especially on leadership abilities. If your company gives 360-degree reviews, you could ask to participate in one, because in those 360 reviews, because they're outside the performance cycle, people are much more likely to be honest about what it takes you to get to the next level. If it's difficult to get a 360 within your organization, if you have a mentor, you can ask the mentor internally to do an informal 360, and you come up with a few questions that they will ask people who you identify, and it should be managers, peers, people below you, and it really can give you that information. Or you can do what that woman did and really approach people who she thought would have an idea as to how she was viewed, which, is really a brave thing to do. But what I always tell people, if you don't have the information you need, you're making decisions about your career with not all the facts. And having those facts is really critical to how you move forward, PJ. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So there's sort of three basic thoughts about when you're thinking about your brand. You want to create an authentic brand that's memorable, that resonates. And so, as we said, you could ask people for their input, but you also want to think about, what is my special sauce? Why would I say to someone that I should get promoted above maybe my peers or someone outside the company? What makes me uniquely different? And your brand is not your title or what you do. It's much more about how you do it or what makes you different in that role. I was working with some women at a law firm. It happens to be at a law firm, and all 5 of them were in the same department doing the same corporate transactions. And they all said to me, we can't have a different brand because we all do the same thing. In talking to their peers, what we revealed was they each had unique things that they were really good at. One was an industry specialist, and her deep knowledge of the industry helped her. Another person was really good at getting deals, difficult, challenging deals with hard-nosed people on the other side to close. She brought calm into these situations that were raffled with disagreements and animosity. Another was really great at finding undisclosed risks. And so by taking the information that they found, they started to curate their brand. You also may want to look at something you do in your personal life or a past career as a hook in terms of your brand. And you want to make sure that it resonates with those people that you're trying to reach. So that's sort of the first step. And it takes some time to do this, and it feels a little bit awkward, but it really is critical that you think about what makes you different. And what I would say from the in-house folks, you also want to make sure you're touting not just your technical legal expertise, but your leadership. Because for the more senior roles in-house, there's an assumption on the legal skills. And what they're really looking for is leadership. And so leadership is how you talk to the business, how you interact. Do you have an ownership mentality about the company, the law department, the group that you're in? Are you looking at ways as to how to improve it? Are you thinking about the pipeline of talent and how the company is cultivating it? So those are things that you want to think about and hint about, and we'll talk a little bit about how this plays out when you're trying to advance a little bit later. You want to then, once you know what your brand is, you want to make sure you're leveraging it in the right brand channels. And by brand channels, I mean things such as your resume, your LinkedIn profile, what you speak and write about, the stories you tell at cocktail parties, and more importantly, interviews. And we'll go in depth on that. And you want to make sure that if you are looking to expand your network or get people who are senior to know you better and what your brand is about, that your brand channels are in the right places where those senior people hang out. And finally, you want to make sure you're honing and updating your brand to meet the market needs and your seniority needs. There was a woman that I worked with who got stuck at a certain level. And before she got stuck, she was like getting great promotions, great raises, great feedback. And what she was doing was alerting the company to a lot of issues. She's a risk spotter, but she was also very animated and dramatic about the risk, which worked when she was junior. But she had to change her brand to be more that calm senior person in crisis management as she got more senior. So you also want to make sure when you're looking at your resume, your CV, your profile, on top of looking at those leadership skills, are you talking a lot about junior tasks, or are you focusing on projects and things that really reflect the seniority of the position you're looking for? You know, like if you are trying to become general counsel, no one cares that you ever drafted discovery requests in your life. It's time to take that off the resume or the profile. So think about what you're emphasizing, what you talk about, and update it as you're moving on. So I'm actually going to share with you some of the questions that I use with clients in thinking about their branding. You know, and not each one of these questions is going to end up in your branding, but the idea is to stimulate your thinking so that it can help you develop that brand and to think of, you know, because people do get stuck in this. The other thing when it comes to branding, I suggest if you have a mentor or someone on a personal board of directors, you may want to work with them to sort of hone out what this brand is. And they will also help you go a little bit further with it. A lot of times, a lot of us hate to brag. We think it sounds salesy, that we'll be judged. And having people who know you well can push you to put a little bit more out there, because that's one of the things I hear a lot from folks is that they are hesitant to start talking about themselves in such a way or putting out a LinkedIn profile that talks about their accomplishments. It seems immodest. And I don't want you to be thinking that way. So I hope that these questions help you as you're going through this process. You know, they're the ones that we started to talk about later. And also, who are my clients? Or I just want to hit this one because people don't always understand why this is important. It's important as to who you advise. The more senior people you advise and you let people know that, the more comfortable they will be in promoting you or hiring you for a higher position if they know they can sort of just have you sit at the C-suite, have you sit with senior management, and that you've done it, you're comfortable, you're good at it.
Sheila, the questions relate mostly to brand today. How do you look forward? What if you're trying to change your brand?
Okay, then you want to sort of think about what you want to be, I think then in that case, you want to understand that information that we were talking about, where you have a clear view of what your brand is today and where you want it to go. So in the case of that one woman, she wanted to go from the person who was a little bit, dramatic in terms of spotting issues to the person in calm. So she started to think about how I am in those meetings. And she really knew that she wanted to script out until it became more natural, how she was going to present, how she was going to talk about things, what was going to be her tone, how she was going to handle objections. And so you start to think about, how do I change those behaviors? She also looked for allies in the room, people who she could trust to give her feedback as to how she was doing. So when she was in a meeting about a crisis, what she said to people, the person who was in the room, one, kept her on point because she knew that person was in the room, but two, that person came in and said, you did really good until you got up to this point of the meeting, and then you went back to your old thing. And it just keeps you honest and it keeps you on track as you're trying to change that brand. Now, if you're trying to also pivot in terms of the type of work that you do, you want to put things out, on LinkedIn. When you speak on panels, you want to talk about how you handle crises. You want to be really thoughtful in what you are putting out there to the world. But remember, your behavior in real life has to be consistent with what you're saying, because when there's a disconnect, that can hamper you, PJ.
We have a question. When you talked about talking about yourself without sounding like you're arrogant, how do you get past the concern that you're coming across that way?
Okay. One, you have to sort of sit down and go through what you're thinking and why you are thinking about that, and realize that it's not true. And that can be hard and it feels difficult. So ways of starting to do it from baby steps is, one, if you have a brag buddy, someone you can enlist where you can help each other share things. I've also found people are more comfortable doing it if they're talking about what other people say. So often I tell people to say things like, my clients have always said, my reviews have reflected. And so it gets you a little bit over that hump, and you want to do it in baby steps. So as you get more comfortable, you'll get a little bit more brazen and bold. And that's what we want. I was watching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I'm a big TV junkie, if you follow me on LinkedIn. And they just had this episode. And one thing that she says is, cowardice is only cute in The Wizard of Oz. And I would say, and then she goes, and it's not even cute there. So courage takes time, but it is really critical. And once you start doing it, it becomes more comfortable. And you'll see that other people are doing it too.
Another question that came in was asking about some strategies for an attorney to pitch themselves for senior positions outside of legal departments. Public salary ranges seem to squeeze in the 100,000s. Unpopular observation or opinion, lawyers are underpaid. So what are some strategies you think that an attorney could use to pitch themselves for these senior positions outside of the legal departments?
The first thing you have to do is look at what you've accomplished and your experience that you've had that are more quote unquote business related than legal. And you want to make, have you led strategic work groups? Have you come up with other ideas that will move the business forward. The other thing is internally is you want to build, which isn't branding, but you want to build relationships with the people in the business sector that you are going to, so that they can start to see you in a different light and talk to them about what the possibility of moving over and what they would like to say. You know, I've seen a lot of people move over to the business side, but it mostly has to do where they, you know, have thought about what they are doing and developed relationships. So the business people see them as business people and not just lawyers. And that means often not being the person who always says no. You know, a lot of times the business has a perception that legal can be the land of no. You want to show that you're a business partner at that table and that you have business acumen. Another thing that you should be thinking about in giving your advice is quoting things on the business. And by this, I mean, instead of just saying, here's a possible solution that might solve the problem where I would like to say no, you say things like, I understand that you want to go forward with this initiative because it will increase revenue, which I know is one of your strategic initiatives. And while we can't do it in the way that you're contemplating, we can do it this way. And the more that you talk about the business as if you understand it and are part of it, the more that people see you as a business partner and collaborator and not a legal technician. One of the brand channels that I do want to talk about, because and we're going to talk about a few of them, is LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is really critical for you to move forward. It is where recruiters look for people. It is when people mention your name as a potential candidate for a position outside the company that they look for. And so you want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile reflects who you are as a leader. And again, not just your title. So, you know, here's an example of one where we have someone whose title, their headline of their LinkedIn profile is just their title. They have a little bit of an about section. It doesn't say much about them. It's really very factual. And it doesn't give you a sense of how it is to work with them and how they are as a leader and an advisor. And I really recommend that you do something that is much more different. And by the way, she had a lousy picture. You should always have a good picture. That's less of a thing today than used to be. Afterwards, it's talking about her as a go-to litigator. She's an IP guru. She's a fashionista. She believes that effective executive presence requires impactful verbal and nonverbal communication, that her appearance is equally important. Now, that's because she's in fashion. So that's, you know, why she says that. And she tells what she specializes in. She gives more insights as to what and how she operates. And that's where you want to integrate your brand. And, you know, and what she speaks on, you get a much better sense. And there's even more here. And she's got a better picture here from Legally Blonde as opposed to Into the Wild. And it tells you more about her. So you get a sense of what it would be like to work for her. I recommend then putting a lot of your experiences in the experience section under each position that you've had. And again, and you should be looking at your LinkedIn quarterly and updating it. I also recommend, I didn't put it here, is listing some of your key skills, because again, when recruiters are looking for people, they're doing some searches across LinkedIn. So they're looking for keywords. But they want, once they have the keywords, you have to give them enough information so they can decide whether or not to call you. You're leaving breadcrumbs for people to find you. As you're also on LinkedIn, developing the brand based on how you post and what you post about. And I know a lot of you may be thinking it's really just about jobs and getting maybe a GC title. I know one GC who has just taken a course with a LinkedIn expert because she wants to up her game as to her expertise in branding. So, you know, we now and then think about people are fortunate or they don't, you know, they just happen to them. A lot of these people really are taking the time to invest and curate in their careers, and branding is really a critical part of it. So as you're thinking about it, think about what could I be doing differently? And for the person who's, said that, they're reluctant to put themselves out there, LinkedIn is a good way to start because a lot of what may be troubling you starts to come out. And so it's starting to think about what can I do differently?
Sheila, how else can social media help with branding and networking?
Okay, a couple of things that I would recommend with regard to social networking. One, you're posting, and you may not want to, if you follow me, like I said, I post every day, which is not necessarily what you need to do as an in-house counsel, but you do want to post when you're doing something significant, or if you're part of a committee that's putting on a webinar, if you're speaking on a panel. You want to post before you speak on the panel and afterwards with the picture, tagging everyone who you know. You want to, when you meet people at networking events, most LinkedIn profiles have with a little bell on it, and you want to click on the bell. When you click on the bell, it ensures that you get all of their posts. So if this is someone you've met at a networking event who you think may be helpful to you down the road, either unlocking speaking opportunities or someone in your industry that you would love to have a stronger relationship with because you think if you do, they may be able to help you. And you're wondering about how you continue the conversation after you leave the conference, by clicking on the bell. And if they're someone who posts a lot, you can comment on what they're posting. You can send them notes. And you could start to sort of develop that relationship. Is that helpful? Okay. I wanted to just give you also an example. CVs, your resume is another place where LinkedIn is really critical. And I'm just giving you examples of two sort of executive parts of people's resume for you to think about. And notice what they're talking about here. They're not talking really about their legal skills. They're talking about what it's like to work with them. And both of these people, I think, have gone on to be, if not GCs, they're pretty GC close to it at this point. But they think about, people are not worried about your legal skills because looking at your resume, they'll see where you work, they'll see what you've done. They're worried about how you are going to be at their table with their senior business leaders. Are you someone who's proactive? Are you someone who's thinking about risk in a commercial way? Are you thinking about the talent behind us? If that's one of your things. The talent. Are you a talent developer? Are you thinking about diversity and the impact it has on an organization? Are you thinking about how we could do things better? And that's what people are trying to do at the top of their resume. And then when you get to the bullet points, you also should be thinking about not just the legal work you've done, but what other things that you have done to make risk, operational and reputational risk, less likely for the company. How have you made them a stronger, more efficient organization? And you want to do this by sort of saying the action that you take with a strong action verb, and then the results. You want to make sure when your CV hits an internal or external recruiter, that you stand out, that they get a sense that you are an impactful leader as well as someone who has great legal skills.
What's the point of the executive summary, and what should people reflect in that?
People should be reflecting a lot about how they think about leadership, how they think about being at the table with the business and advising the company. You should be thinking about if I was a company, would this be the person that I want as a leader of this organization based on what I say here? Now, again, it's really critical, whether it's LinkedIn or your CV, or we'll talk about the interview stories in a second, that in all these, that it's accurate and true, because people are going to ask you questions. People have asked people that I know, what does it mean when you say you're a business owner mindset? What does that mean? Tell me about an example when you've done that. And this, again, is giving people a sense of who you are in a quick way And again, underneath this too, I would put some additional skills that may not be on the resume, because you're hopefully going to move your resume out of your inbox and you're going to give it to some recruiters. Now, recruiters are not your friend. They're only your friend when you can help them fill a position that will get them a nice paycheck, but they will go to their database. So you do want to make sure that you're up to date here. And then it also matters internally too, because for a lot of internal positions, you have to also have a really up-to-date resume. And this is telling people that you understand that the more senior you become as an in-house attorney, the more critical the non-legal things become. And so that you are promoting those things because you know that they matter to organizations.
If you are in the process of trying to update your resume, or you are trying to figure out what to include on it, is it best to try to do that yourself? Or what are some suggestions for how you can make sure your resume is covering what it should be covering and should you have different resumes for different positions that you're applying for?
Yes, on all of that. There's a couple of things. You can do it by yourself. Again, I do think coaches are helpful. I do think mentors are people that you can work with, because again, a lot of us tend to pull back and not maybe put our whole selves out there, and having someone push you to go a little bit further is important. I think about also the non-legal things you've done in-house. Think about the strategic, like I said, the strategic initiatives that you've led that may have had a greater impact. You want to, again, talk about the impact. So you don't want to just say to someone, I updated the contract system. No, it really is, instead of I updated the, I've rebuilt the contract system, causing a 25% increase in turnaround time for contracts coming in. It's much more impactful when you can sort of think about it in that way. And you do want different resumes for different positions. You may want a different resume, internal versus external. You may have been that guiding force behind something, but there may be someone within your company who thinks that they are. So think about that also as you're putting together the resume. So you may want one different for internal and external, and for different positions, you may want to hone it also.
How can an employment lawyer make the shift to a C-suite HR role and not just be considered an attorney, particularly when folks are limited in wanting to see someone who has worked their way up through various HR roles, recruitment, benefits, et cetera?
Well, the first thing is you have to act like you're not just an attorney when you're in the room. And you want to you want to network with the right people who might see your value going forward. So you want to be making those right moves in terms of your network, so that when you're making a switch, people can make the switch, but it's generally easier when people know you, whether they're at your company, maybe had been in your company, maybe they're at an organization with you. You want to make sure that you have the right network, and you want to talk about not just the legal aspects of employment, but your ideas that maybe you brought to the table as a lawyer that were really business functions. And you want to use your network not just to help you get the resume in, but to help you expand your network. So if you want to become C-suite in the HR, maybe depending on what level you are now, maybe you have to work your way up, or maybe you're thinking about a direct transfer. You want to see who in your network has relationships with people who are in that C-suite and are happy. This is the one thing I tell people. You want to tell people who are really happy in the position that you want, that you're looking, so that if a recruiter reaches out to them, they think about referring the recruiter to you or telling you about that open spot.
Another question that just came in. What are your thoughts on applying DE&I to your brand?
I think it's a great thing to apply DE&I into brand. It's been part of my brand, both when I was in-house and currently. But you want to talk about, again, the impact. If you say you're a DEI champion or a DEI sponsor, you better be able to back it up. and to have real stories, real things that you have done, and not just put it as a nice to have because it will make you look good. The other thing internally to think about, and this doesn't just go for DE&I, it goes for any branding. If you are looking for an internal promotion, you want to make sure whatever you're touting as your brand is not the same as someone else. So for example, if there is someone in the organization who is about your level and might be up for the same roles as you going forward, and that person has already sort of been known as the D&I specialist, it's hard to break in. It's not impossible, but you may want to be then known as the process person or the general talent person or the person who the business wants at the table because your advice is so commercial. So you want to be thinking a little bit strategically when you're thinking about your internal brand and making sure that you're not going into a space that's already taken up so that you don't look like unique. You want to show what is your special sauce as opposed to somebody else's. You don't want to look like every other vanilla ice cream cone. Not enough time is spent on your brand in terms of the stories that you tell. Stories are really critical in a couple of ways. One, as a leader, the ability to tell stories and relate to people is, important in terms of galvanizing people for a vision that can happen, helping to motivate people who may be having performance reviews. Storytelling is a way of enhancing your brand when you are on a panel. If you're saying the same old thing without a story, without being interested, people don't remember you. People remember stories. I can say that I'm collaborative, but if I tell a story about how I identified an issue and I brought in all the key stakeholders to make sure I really understood their pain points and their points of view, then it seems more real that I'm not just using the buzzword du jour, but instead I am telling them what I've actually done. And so storytelling is one of the things that you need to do. And the one thing I want to get back to on storytelling is probably the most important skill for your interview prep, which we're going to talk about in a second. But let me talk about the stories for a moment. Most senior positions now, they'll ask a little bit about your resume. They will ask about your legal skills more so if it's a startup or they've had a problem with someone in that position before with poor legal skills. But they really are starting to want to know about how you are as a leader, how you are as a legal executive. So you get a lot of behavioral type questions, such as, tell me about a time you helped drive the business forward. Tell me about a time you had to say no to the CEO. Tell me about a time when you had to use cultural acumen to help effectuate a better results. And these stories that you tell really enable people to understand how you will be as a leader. There is one company, where you have to go through 6 layers of interviews, and they request that you don't repeat a story during any of it, because they believe at their organization, you should have so many experiences that you can tell your stories. I have had recruiters tell me that they do this and they can tell whether or not this is true. And that's why it has to be true. And it takes time to think about all you've accomplished and also to tell the story in a way that screams leadership, that screams that this is someone you want at the table. So while it's in here, as part of your interview prep, you should be putting together your stories and thinking about how you want to frame them. But also in the interview, you want to know your brand. Many of us get asked that question, tell me about yourself. And that question's answer really should be sort of talking about your strengths, which is your brand and why they should hire you. You want to look at the postings for what's important to that organization. Are they looking for someone who has a sense of humor? Are they looking for someone who's process oriented? Are they looking for someone who can deal with difficult personalities? I just saw that in a posting recently. And so you want to have stories that you can talk about on how you deal with those types of situations. So you want to also do your homework. You want to research everyone who's interviewing you. You want to research the company. You want to know what's important. We talked about the stories. You want to frame your approach. I tell people you want to, talk about your philosophy on certain topics that they bring up. What's your, my philosophy, how I think general counsel should be, how I think every in-house counsel should act. And that's why in this case, I acted this way. You want to highlight, if they ask you about your mistakes or missteps, what you learned. And you want to focus on how you do things and not what you did. They're not concerned in the interviews about the nuances to the contract provision you got through. They're interested in how you got those provisions changed, if that makes sense.
Sheila, what should people be thinking about when they're preparing their stories, if they're preparing for an interview? How's the best way to go about doing that?
I believe that you should, first of all, write them down. Like, you want to have written stories, and as part of your interview, you want to read them so you're familiar, so they come off naturally. And you want to write them down in a way that you want to say them at the time. Because sometimes we say things in interviews in a little bit more highfalutin manner than we might in normal conversation. And so it doesn't feel natural, but the more that you have sort of gone over your stories in that language, the easier it is for you to pull out that language and speak that way during the interview process. And like your LinkedIn and your CV, you want to update your stories as life changes, because there may have been something like, oh, I've never helped drive a business process forward. But now you have, so you came up with something you could say, but it wasn't a great example, but now you have. And so you want to update it to reflect those things. And the stories you tell don't have to be from your most recent position. It can be from any position. And I've actually had someone who told me the story about how he sold things door to door as a child and how that gave him a certain focus in his legal career. And it was really impactful. So you do want to think about, what could I say or do that will make me stand out in a little bit of different way?
Another question that came in, can you recommend a worksheet to help guide the interview prep process?
You can use, I think this PowerPoint and this recording will be on, you can think about that, but I do think Google behavioral questions will give you some of the behavioral questions. And the key thing is on the behavioral questions is a lot of times I hear from lawyers, but it doesn't refer to my legal skills. That's the point. Companies are really not asking you always about the legal skills. I think anyone who's prepping probably can answer anything about their legal background. But it's the leadership thing. It's the weird questions that make you think about, what have I maybe done? And then again, like with everything else, if you can have someone review that to make sure that you are projecting what you think you are, it can be helpful. And also when we say know your brand, let me just, in terms of the prep, the other thing I would think of is now and then, in my brand, I probably have 7 or 8 things I think I'm really good at. I normally talk about 3 in each interview. And you change those things based on what the interview is for, what they say in their posting. And so you want to really be not wed to anything, but thinking about holistically, how can I best present myself in this situation?
So based on what you said, one of the next questions was asking about about the interview questions that you are trying to prepare for, because the internet does have such a vast quantity of these questions. How do you determine what questions really are worth preparing for and are the ones that I really should take some time to focus on this, perhaps come up with my story for it?
The key things, okay, the key questions that I believe are important is, tell me about yourself. Is there anything else I should know about you? Tell me about your network. Tell me about a time that you improved a business or legal process. That could be 2 different things. Tell me about what you said in reviews. what you've heard about yourself in reviews, both positive and negative. And by the way, if people ask you for a negative, do not say the typo story. Just going to say the typo story. No one wants to hear about that you've read something 13 times and it was a typo. They really are looking for a learning. But I know I really recommend, especially if you're at the beginning of the process, answer as many of these questions as you can, because if each question spurs a different story. And even if they don't ask you that exact question, you're so familiar with your stories when you go in and what you've done that you can easily pick another story from a different question and insert it into the interview. So it's a time, I will tell you, I spend a lot of time with my clients on this. I think I have 30 or 40 questions that we work on together. And we spent a lot of time revising it in the written format and then talking it through and taping it. It really is critical, especially for the most senior positions. Once you start to get to people manager positions, the ability to have stories available is important. And even if they don't do behavioral questions, the stories, again, cement what it's like to work with you.
Great. Another question was, how do you address a termination from a previous job?
You work on your answer as to what happened, and it depends a lot on why you were terminated, to be honest, but you should always say the truth. You could say that it was not a good cultural fit, if that was the case. You could say that, it was a layoff, if that's the case. And the reason you want to be truthful is because people know more people than you think. And people are I know when I knew somebody who was interviewing for a position, I get a phone call all the time as to what they're like. And so you do want to be truthful, but you do want to put it about learnings. You may want to say it wasn't a really good cultural fit. And that's why I'm excited about this opportunity, because based on what I've heard about the company and your management style, I think that I could be a great fit here. Okay, so I want, we're getting sort of towards the end here, and I want you to sort of think about, and please put more Q&A in. I want you to be thinking about what, based on what we talked about, you would like to change with your brand and how to do it. I want you to think about what would it be like today? And the best place to start is, what is my brand today? What is it out there? And you can ask people. And then the second thing that you want to do is start to think about, as PJ had mentioned earlier, what do I want it to be? And what do I want people to know about me? And by the way, you may also need to sort of up your experience level too, in terms of how you're branding yourself. And by this, I mean, if you're not someone who speaks, you may want to start speaking. If you're not someone who writes or posts or uses LinkedIn, you may want to think about that. If you realize that the role that you are looking at generally requires certain experiences or would be easier with them, you want to look for ways that you can get those experiences either inside or outside your company, and then start to reflect them in your branding.
When you talk about the LinkedIn profile, are there any additional tips that you can give outside of what we've already talked about that would really make sure that the profile is impactful?
Okay, this is going to sound silly. I talked about the profile picture, but the back banner of the LinkedIn profile, which sort of this gray thing, if you don't put anything in it, puts a picture in there. It really makes a tremendous difference in making you pop. And it's just a visual thing so that you want to do it. You also want to make sure that it is easily scannable. And this goes for your CV also. The people who have those dense paragraphs, for each position, people have gotten lazy in this world of social media and they scan. We don't read intently. So people have to very easily be able to read both your CV and your LinkedIn. And when you're scanning it, you want to be thinking, Is there white space? A lot of people put bullet points because, again, easy to scan, as well as those special words. You know, you want to make sure you're using the keywords that you're seeing in postings for the positions that you are trying to obtain. Because then when either the recruiter is looking at their database or they're looking at LinkedIn for somebody, they will come across you and you will pop, and then you will be able to come in for the interview. You also want, some people also use the featured section very effectively. So if you've been interviewed for something, or you've been on a panel, there's a feature section on LinkedIn where you can leave that article. And so it's not just posting if you've been featured on an article, but you want to be thinking about whether you want it on your profile so that people can see it. The other thing with branding, that a lot of my clients who have been asked to do articles, and by the way, they're not just all GCs. I've had people at the senior counsel level and council level get featured in some articles or newsletters. And what we've done is we've actually worked together to make sure that their responses, because the interviews are usually written, really reflect their brand, because people will Google you later as part of this process. So you want everything that's out there to sort of emphasize this branding. So if they Google and they see that you've spoken on a lot of panels, that's one indicator. The other thing I would say on speaking, it just came to me, is a lot of times we speak on what we're comfortable on. So a lot of people speak on, if they're a tax lawyer, tax issues. If they're a litigator, e-discovery. You will rarely see someone who is a GC or senior speak on those issues. They are speaking about leadership, resource management, how to galvanize and empower a workforce. They're thinking about process improvement. So ideally, if you're someone who speaks a lot, you want to go towards those types of speaking opportunities. If you are just starting and the speaking opportunities are really more legal technical issues, you want to bring in these ideas of leadership into what you're speaking about. Because remember, in the audience are people who are hiring. There are people who are hearing about positions. So you want to make sure that you are speaking in a tone and about things that they think of when they think of more senior roles.
Another question, can you recommend some tips about networking at events in an area you may be interested in moving into? Like, how does this differ from other branding suggestions related to interviews and resumes?
Okay, so if you're interested in moving into a new area, the first thing is to look into your LinkedIn as to who you currently know in that area. And you also want to figure out which events people who you want to meet are attending. So if you are that employment person, you want to maybe go to where HR and employment lawyers both go to events. If you want to become an ESG person, you want to be in forums where they're talking about ESG, even though you've done more traditional corporate work. And then you want to look at who's speaking. And you want to select the panels very carefully. You want to research those people, see which panels, see if you have something in common with any of the speakers. And then you want to try to talk to the speaker afterwards, if you can, and maybe see if they will do a 10-minute Zoom call with you or a coffee at the event. I would also say, don't underestimate people who are on webinars. Webinars in the Zoom world are very lonely for speakers. They get on them, they do their speaking, they put it on LinkedIn, but it's not like being in real person where people come up to the podium afterwards. And so they do this presentation to a lot of black boxes. They get off and they get no feedback. So what I would recommend, if you are attending one of these and the person is someone who's had a career that you want to follow or would be a good person to know, write them a really nice note after their webinar saying to them, I would love to get to know you. I thought this was really impactful. And because you're not getting everyone doing it, you may stand out and you may get that chance. And then again, after the events, if you do meet them, reach out to them on LinkedIn, follow them, interact with them on LinkedIn if they are that person, and maybe then ask for that Zoom call if you didn't get it the first time. And remember what people have told you. Some people do cheat sheets as to, I met PJ and she told me her daughter was going to college and she's going to Italy and she is really trying to find speakers on this topic for the upcoming conference. Remember that, because when you write to them, you want to sort of reference what they say. Oh, I just heard about this great speaker I thought you would be interested in. Oh, this is, my friend just got back from Italy and recommended this Italian restaurant. Whatever, or I guess all restaurants in Italy are Italian, but, or mostly, but you want to be thinking about how you can keep a personal connection, and that it's important. And also always remember to ask what you can do for somebody else, no matter what their level. You never know what the answer is going to be, and it really is the polite thing to do. So as you're thinking about branding, a lot of people are afraid because it is putting themselves out there and it feels kind of vulnerable. But remember, the idea is you just have to act. If you wait till you're fully confident, you're going to see all of these opportunities pass you by. And it's really not bragging if it's the truth. And so I want you to get much more comfortable with the idea of letting the world know what you're about and what's unique about you, because you can help an organization get to that next level if you're given that opportunity. And then just if you want more tips, you can get more tips off of this website, these are some of mine for in-house counsel. And I hope this was very helpful to you. I don't know if there was any more questions, PJ.
Sheila, we had one last question of someone had said that if they've received a number of awards, they think it looks like they're on the award train or a glory hound. I want to rebrand as a thought leader. Any recommendations?
Okay. First of all, award winning is always a great thing to put in, and people do remember it. I remember speaking to a woman about the fact that she was on a roll. She was an award winning, and it made an impression on me. I thought she had something going on, that she was out there. There is also one CLO who only hires GCs who she thinks are curating their careers, and which is sort of an interesting thing, because she says, I'm trying to curate the careers of everybody in my organization. So if you're not doing it for yourself, I don't think anyone is. So I don't think it's a bad thing. But if you want to be more of a thought leader, then you want to think about what you're putting out there. What are you speaking about? What are you putting on LinkedIn? Are there people, if you're getting awards, you probably have a fairly good network. Are there people you could talk to about opportunities to share thought leadership in terms of panels, committees, discussions, your point of view? It's getting more comfortable putting yourself out there. And always think about, are you just putting out the same thoughts as everybody else? Are you repeating what everyone else is? Or are you putting your own twist or a different approach in what you're doing? You don't want to be sort of this, in a sea of whiteness, the same thing. You want to stand out. You want to be red or blue or black. You want to be someone who stands out by being a little bit different and being unique.
It's been amazing information, Sheila. I can't tell you how beneficial I think it's been for all of us to just think about things that we probably wouldn't think about every day. And it's so helpful to have someone that can kind of guide us in that direction. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, if they had additional questions, what would be the best way for them to do that?
They can either go to my LinkedIn, which is Sheila Murphy /Focus Forward, or they can go to my email me at sheila@focus-forward-consulting.com. I'm happy to answer anyone's, additional questions, especially if they felt a little, funny raising it in the forum. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate all of the guidance, suggestions, tips. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.